in which people were treated with methods that we today would find barbaric.
Before we had an understanding about, well, what is dementia, what is schizophrenia, a lot of these illnesses were simply lumped together as insanity. They were just put away without any consideration for their individual circumstances.
It had a reputation. Part of the reputation wasn't so good because, I heard that it was the nut house and for crazy people.
The issue of restraint and shackles and all of that is what people tend to think about when they think of asylums. But that isn't what asylums were all about. One of the things that authors would say was, well, these things were put out in the countryside, in small communities out in the countryside, because they wanted the crazy people to be out of sight. And that's just simply not true. They wanted to have a quiet, pastoral setting.
As big as Peoria State Hospital was, yes, I think there probably were some normal people. A lot of the people were older, probably didn't have a lot wrong with them, but their family didn't want to care for them, so they would just drop them off at Peoria State Hospital.
In the later years, they really didn't realize that dementia and those kind of things just came with age, not necessarily with insanity.
Prior to the 1960s, there were hardly any nursing homes anywhere in the country.
1969. Old Mrs. Smiths are big problems. We'll call her Mrs. Smith. Neither physically or mentally ill, she suffers too much from the infirmities of old age to be able to care for herself. She's been in Peoria State Hospital for 2 months, and she has recovered from the second stroke as much as she ever will. She no longer belongs in the state hospital, but nobody else will have her. Nobody knows how many Peorians there are like Mrs. Smith. Some younger, some older, some without relatives who could be responsible, others just without relatives who will be responsible. But there are plenty.
If you were a burden to your family, back then the admission criteria to a state facility was pretty lax. We had probably twice as many women as residents out there as we did men. And the reason for that, I believe, was back then women didn't have the rights that they have today, and the husband's word was enough to put them in, or that of the family doctor.
The pendulum swung back to maybe a more reasonable place where now someone can in fact be committed based on history.
We've come a long way in weeding out who can and who can't be in a state mental hospital.
And women were locked up here for symptoms of menopause. People were locked up in here just because they were unruly, hard to get along with.
In the early days, it takes 2 grown men to put a woman into an institution. It takes 3 men to put a man into an institution. Well, if you want to get rid of your wife, you and your brother have her locked up. At that point, divorce is very easy. Dr. Zeller was one of the first physicians to actually stop that practice. He made them all go through a psychiatric evaluation to make sure that they really needed to be here at the hospital. He was all about the worst of the worst cases. If he could help them, then he could help so many more people.
It started out as just this strange story that had passed down through the family, but it was kept very secretive. My Grandpa Depew only told his eldest daughter, my Grandma Virginia. None of her other sisters know about it, and my grandma only told my mother. Mom's the youngest daughter of 8 kids, and none of the other ones have ever heard about Ruth. Most of them didn't even know that Grandpa Depew had a sister. This story has just been kept such a secret for so long, and when I started doing the research, it was awful to think about nobody ever going back.
Some of them had no families or no one to help them, and some of them had families who would not help them. They didn't want to be associated with them, and that's why some of them were out there in the first place, because their families had taken them out there and so-called dumped them and just left them and forgot them.
I had heard a story when I was a little girl about my great-great-aunt Ruth being placed in an insane asylum, and when he called me back, I could just hear in his voice, he was sad. And he's like, I've never seen a file this thin before. And, he gave me everything he could, and he said she was buried in Memorial Park Cemetery. So I called the cemetery, and I said, okay, I have her name, I have her death date, I know that she was cremated, and they don't have any record of her there. At the funeral home, there was no obituary, there was no service, there was no family or next of kin, and they sent her remains to be cremated, and according to the funeral home, she was buried at Memorial Park Cemetery, but the cemetery has no record of her, so she didn't matter in life or death. In 1891, my Grandpa Ebenezer's first wife, Susan, passed away. The very next year, he married a woman named Anna, and together they had 3 children, the youngest of which was Ruth, and Ruth was born in 1901. One day, when they came home from church, she had turned all the pictures to face the wall because she thought everybody was judging her and that they were all looking at her, and she was horrified. They decided they didn't want to deal with it, and they dropped her off, and nobody ever went back to get her. Yes, her family abused her, but it was maybe a blessing to send her there to get away from the abuse. Apparently her father decided to make her... I'm sorry. He made her the woman of the house, and he molested her. And, her brothers decided to do it too. So she was molested by most of the men in her family. I speculated to Mom, I said, did her father want to have at her earlier? And when the mother tried to protest, declared insane and got rid of her. Anna was sent to Bartonville in sometime during 1915, and she passed away there November 6th, 1915. There's the letter that I have, and in that letter, her mother describes a very happy, busy family. She goes and she mentions every one of her children, and she just talks about all of the family, and it sounds like it was just a close, happy family. But something happened when Anna died, and I guess it changed everything, and I think she couldn't help but feel the despair at losing what she had. Mom was told the story from Grandma when she was young teenager, early teenage years. The next time that she saw her Grandpa, she said something to him about Ruth, and he just looked at her like, what are you thinking? And later, my Grandma turned on her and just was like, why did you do that? Why would you even bring that up? And at that point in time, that might have been 1968. Ruth was still alive, and he still knew where she was because she was still in the same place she'd been for 50 years. Who knows what happened to her? She is kind of, I guess, just as mysterious in death. That's how you could, I guess, tell the story of her life in 2 words. Nobody cared.